I always was interested in the space right in the middle between documentary and fiction. We can talk about OG later, but it's like a fiction film with a great actor that uses documentary techniques because it shoots with inmates in a real prison. And then
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about it now. I mean,
okay, yeah. I mean, yeah, I know. I'm rambling. I'm sorry.
I love this movie. It's like you shot in a maximum security prison in Indiana. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was in Indiana,
And that everything just went perfect, I'm guessing.
It's great. Yeah. Nothing happened, We shot 9 to 5 and that was it. Like, very easy.
All one day.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it was like we had a small crew. It was written as a script, and the script was written with Stephen Belber and the director Madeline. We'd gone there a year earlier after she got the permission for this to shoot in that prison after writing to 100 different prisons around the country. These people were interested in restorative justice, and they thought this film could help with that process. So that was our in. And while Madeline, and with a little bit of my help, made a documentary, we sort of interviewed people in the prison, and based on the interviews of the prisoners that we got to interview, that were selected by the prison for us, Madeline had Stephen write the script. The script was based on the interviews with an idea of a film about somebody who spent his whole life in prison and had the conflict about how to get out. And that was sort of the concept. And then based on the prisoners' interviews, it was written as a script. And then when we got in there, we put together a crew. Madeline got Jeffrey Wright to play the lead. And we had 2 or 3 other actors, but everybody else, most of the crew, a lot of the crew, I'd say half of the crew, were inmates in this maximum security prison, and then all the other, of course, every extra was an inmate, and a lot of other acting parts were either wardens of the prison or inmates.
Yeah, because
so
it's like
crazy mix.
It's like an interesting movie just because, Jeffrey Wright is an actor, but because he's next to all these people who are non-actors, that kind of tricks your brain into being like, is this real?
You
Like,
get
there's
arrested.
moments where you're like, is this real? Like, I can't tell.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, when I watched the film, it was always the experience of making it, and to me, it was one of my favorite experiences ever because you get the best of both worlds. As love and documentary and fiction. You're going in with real people, you're getting their stories and their lives, and then you have you can set up some shots and you can do some moves. And,
Was there any sort of security measures taken? Did you always have a guard with you next to the camera or something? What was the?
Yeah, I mean, so we had 2 guards every time. So we had to. We spent one day bringing our gear in with a truck that went through the normal loading dock where you had to spend pretty much the whole day down to every screwdriver that we weren't allowed to bring in. We had to open up every cases, take everything apart, and went through the gate where the food and the deliveries are coming in. And we spent a good part of the day before we started shooting just bringing most of the gear in, the cameras. I brought one light in that I ended up not using, so there wasn't much lighting, but there was some C-stands and a little bit of that. But and we had a little doorway dolly and the Movi. We had an Alexa and some Cook S4. So we had some stuff, but it wasn't massive. And then every morning we would go in with a crew, which grew depending on how many actors we'd bring in. There was definitely a hair makeup person. I would say the minimum was maybe 13, 15 people, and then it grew to maybe 40 when we had a big scene where we had a stunt coordinator to do the fight, choreography. There's a fight in the film that was choreographed by a friend of Jeffrey Wright's, who brought in a stunt coordinator to do this with the inmates. And so that was maybe one of the bigger days. So yeah, that was the crew size. So or crew and cast size.
So in an environment like that, where you're working sort of with the lighting that's in the space, how are you manipulating that to get what you got out of it? Because it's very cinematic.
Well, thanks. One film before I stopped using movie lights is this film, Sophie and the Rising Sun. That was also at Sundance, actually. But it's a film, it's a period piece, World War II love affair between a Japanese guy. So it's not the same terrain. And I started thinking that I like, from documentary filming, I like the flexibility and the freedom of not using any movie lights anymore. And that film had a slightly bigger budget and crew, and we had 6 and 6 in the lighting department, and with trucks, and nobody believed me that I didn't need the HMIs. So after the first week, we sent them home. You know,
Wow.
and we kept a few lights for the night lighting, but the day lighting, you know, I just basically didn't light. For night exteriors, I needed to still light it. But that made me fall in love with the way daylight falls into a space, the way you can have a practical placed in the right place, and how you can, you know, futz with the curtains to get just the right amount of light coming in, and that's the same thing I ended up doing in the prison. So the hardest thing was to turning lights off. That's always, you know, the most complicated things, especially in a prison.
Yeah,
So-
'cause it's all just
Turn
like,
the
It's
whole
all
switch.
one whole
Yeah, yeah,
floor.
yeah.
Yeah.
We got, like, when we shot the cells, all the stuff in the cells, this prison was very full. It was very hard to get a cell where we shot all the scenes. So it was at the very end, we shot all the scenes with Jeffrey alone in a cell. And we got one day, another prisoner was displaced, and he was, you know, he went into a even less comfortable cell. So we could film in there, and we had maybe had it 2 days. But we had I think we only had one day in that cell. But then the hallway near it, we had to. I asked them to turn the lights off, and they were okay with that. Because then the daylight, and then when you have a certain color timing in it, you get a little bit of that blue-green in there, in the daylight. And then all the lights that I used in the cell were basically stuff I could buy in the commissary, which is the prison.
Oh, interesting.
So there's a little clip-on light where he's reading at night. That's the only thing they're allowed to use, right? So I really used the real stuff, which was so
Wow.
fun. I think it looks great. He's just reading
Yeah.
at night. And then there's one light I brought in, which is like a light that I probably bought in 1990. It's not a light. It's like in my old loft when I lived in Tribeca, I had like this under-counter fluorescent light that was funky green. And the new fluorescents are not green. So that I taped that, you know, with just gaff tape inside his cell because I just liked that. Those were the two lights we used in there.
it's wild.
That's nuts.
So what is it? Just you like
Negative
It kind
fill.
of gives you more like flexibility to not like kind of be locked into this like lighting setup, or it makes it feel more real.
I think it's also the freedom of like swinging the camera around, not seeing gear. You know, that's a big part of it. Even I get a little crazy. I like space and openness and
Yeah.
small. But when I look one way and there's like grip stands here and there, and I can't move the camera, that makes me nervous. You know. So if I
You
feel
like you like the room to play with the camera, basically, to
For
let
sure,
the actor
yeah.
move around.
actors move around for sure. They like the freedom, but also just like for the camera, you know. And that said, what you need to do with that stuff, you need to also be flexible to say, okay, this is like the sun's behind us, this light's horrible. We just need to move around. In fiction, that's sometimes hard to do because there's
Yeah.
a lot of people following you. So
So like changes maybe we'll shoot this scene in a couple hours when the light changes kind of thing.
no, I mean that. Generally, the pace on fiction is so fast that you have to just make the decision right now.
yeah.
We're setting up a shot when you're outside and the sun moves. He says, "Okay, that's the background we want it, but we can't. We need to shoot this way. Can we move these two trucks? And it has to happen now, kind of thing. That gets people crazy. You know?
Yeah.
So it's not always easier to shoot with no lights. There's a lot of production constraints, and doesn't always work best.
Was your pacing like on like your shoot pacing on that? Were you just kind of doing like one scene a day? Because you must have been limited like when you had access to the prison, right?
No, well, there's a lot of the internal movements of the prison are very regulated. They go to chow, you know, there's cell block A, there's different cell blocks. They have their times when they all go to lunch, during which we weren't allowed in the except for the one time or the two times when we shot with them, with the chow lines. So we had to sort of stand down when the prisoners were in the yard, and then we could go in the yard when they weren't there. So there was a lot of waiting and then shooting when we were, and then the moves from one place to another took a long time. And if anybody had to use the bathroom on set, the whole production had to stop. Everybody had to go back. So it was a bit slow, and
Yeah.
you know, so we had to, you know, not drink so much water. And
How long was the shoot? Do you know?
we had 4 weeks, maybe 4 or 5 day weeks. Yeah.
That's still pretty fast. That's
Yeah.
fast. 20-day
fast.
features.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe it was 22. We did a few extra days. We shot exteriors of the prison, which we never really used. And
Yeah.
I'm glad we didn't because it's so nice to stay in that intensity inside.
Yeah.
And that was the whole idea, that we never look over the walls. But the most fun scene to shoot was actually with Torsten on the gimbal. There's a longer scene where you go where they all go into chow before the fight breaks out, and we had to shoot this in a real chow line that's moving. The chow line is when they're all going to eat, right? So when there's like generally 80 people in a line or so, roughly, they're coming out of one cell block, and they all walked over in formation, you know, with the guards on both sides to go eat in the commissary. or in the chow hall. And during that line, we're allowed to have them go in from the block to where they're eating twice. And during that time, we had to do a 4-page dialogue scene with Jeffrey and 2, inmates playing gang members in the prison. And I think Thorsten did such a beautiful job. I mean, we really mapped this out, and this was very storyboarded. So we had like one scene where Jeffrey runs ahead of the line, finds the guy from that he wants to sort of dress down from the rival gang, and goes back with him in the chow line, talks to somebody else. It had to be choreographed. There's one long shot, and then the second time we basically did the counter shot, moving. The whole thing was moving, and did the reverse angle with the same choreography in the existing line.
And that's it.
Which we only had 2 chances to get.
Whoa.
So that was fun. I mean, and it was exciting to do, and I think it played pretty well. So.
Yeah.
Did you block that beforehand somewhere else, or you just had to map it out and just go for it?
No, I mean, Madeline and I did like overhead storyboards where we just like figured this is block A, this is where they're going, and then I make a little stick, sort of little camera signs, and I just draw this on a piece of paper, and if you go from here to here, and then as it was happening, we discussed it before the line happened with Jeffrey and the other actors, and the line was out, and they held them for a second with us, and we said from here, and at this, when they're coming in the courtyard, making the corner, that's where you meet the other person, and you come back here. And Thorsten, the movie operator, was dialed in because he knew exactly who to follow. One time, behind Jeffrey, and one time with Jeffrey, pretty much against the existing line and 2 takes.
Were the inmates receptive of you guys being there, or was it like a too much of a disturbance for them?
I think they all liked the attention, to be honest.
Yeah.
I think often people get very forgotten in prisons and this is, I mean, not everybody, but there was some catcalls every now and then, but I think by and large, especially the people who participated, they loved it. It was such a great distraction from being in there and having something else that other people could see and feeling they're doing something good. It was a restorative justice element to the film, and then participating. So they were kind of proud of it. That's the sense I got from it.
Did they get to see it? Do you know?
Yeah, we did a screening in the prison, and then we didn't, but when it premiered at Tribeca, there was a Q&A with the inmates zooming in.
That's awesome.
It was really
cool.
fun. Yeah, it was great. A lot of people in the prison knew my name, Wolf. They were shouting Wolf through the windows sometimes. It was kind of fun.
It's a great name, I mean.
Well, but it's also to feel like a sense like that this is something that is actually, appreciated. And the harder thing was actually to make sure the guards didn't feel like, oh, we're making the movie stars, which wasn't the intention.
Right.
There's definitely 2 sides to it. And the people who, were wronged by the people who are in prison, they have a valid concern that we're making these guys heroes, which is not what the film does. But there was and the guards were sort of made sure that we speak to both sides, and there was some compensations made to a victims fund from the film. None of the inmates were paid and so forth.
And is that like Auto Body Shop? Was that like something that was actually in the prison, or was that something that was like staged outside the prison?
No, that's the Auto Body Shop in the prison. It's the real one. Yeah.
Oh wow.
The guy who runs it is an actor, but the other people are actually in that workshop. Or some of them we found through the documentary. In there.
That's crazy.
And that one I was playing with, there were 4 rows of fluorescence overheads I was playing. And my big lighting plan was, to choose which one of those I turn on and which of the side doors and how far open I roll them up and down to light what's this. And there's a lot of variety if you look at the scenes in there with the lighting, because sometimes they're all open, a lot of daylight, and sometimes no overheads, and sometimes they're all closed and just this one row, and it feels, moody.
Did you I'm guessing got to do like a scout of the prison beforehand?
Well, I spent almost 5 or 6 trips over the year doing the documentary, and I filmed the original interviews, which we still have to write the script. So I was there a lot. I was there.
And were you kind of in that time like using the space as the lighting element as well, or did you kind of like come up with that plan while you were there?
You can't move around. I didn't really see the lighting. I mean, we got one scout closer to the shoot, but when I was doing the documentary, we never saw the Auto Body Shop as far as I remember, because you have to be taken there by a guard, and it's kind of hard. Everything is very formalized, the movements. We were allowed in one room where we were allowed to shoot the documentary, and we had one staging room where gear later ended up being, and for the documentary it was the same room.
So you said 2 projects came out of this.
Yeah,
this
the other
trip.
one is called Hard Truth. It's also on HBO.
That's the documentary.
Yeah.
And you said they like animated the.
Well, in that film, they animated that was a meta film, meaning that the inmates actually told each other, they interviewed each other. I set up like 2 Canon C500s in a room where they interview each other, and then we watch it from the outside and let them go after they'd done a couple of, documentary film class where they watched like Grizzly Man and learned about lower thirds, and that's in the film. There's some fun stuff in there as they, as some of these inmates get to learn about documentary filmmaking, and then they get into it and they're making their own film. And out of these documentary interviews that they're filming, in a group discussion that we then filmed, they came up with like they selected 4 stories to tell through animation of their backstories, of their path to prison, so to speak, the crimes they committed, and they were then animated, and then there's a wrap up in the film about how they all go through it. So it's a beautiful project, I think.
Yeah.
That's cool. And those were the interviews that you used to write the script for OG?
They were separate interviews. It just happened at the same time. We were there to make sure that it took so long to get this together and to get Jeffrey Wright on board and so forth that we wanted to keep the prison that had allowed us to go in interested in us. So the whole documentary going in there all the time showed them also the intent. It was like to really do restorative justice and to,
That's awesome.
Yeah, we're not coming in there as Hollywood.
Yeah. When you say restorative justice, what do you mean by that exactly?
Well, it's the idea that prisoners can maybe work on redeeming themselves through, what they do in the prisons. And there's a whole program in prisons about restorative justice, which is one scene in the film where they have to confront their victims, they have to fess up to their crimes, and they have to acknowledge their crimes. And out of that can come some healing and the first step to maybe, if they ever get out, to reintegration.
Yeah.
And that was, I think, the talking points in the prison.
That's cool. So it's like part of the rehabilitation of the prisoners in there as well, basically, to reintegrate them into society.
Yeah, I mean, that's the goal.
Yeah.
But it has to come from them, wanting to do it themselves, changing and accepting
It's a heavy
the
scene.
responsibility. I mean, it's a heavy scene where Jeffrey Wright plays the murderer who has to confront the sister of the person he murdered in the film. This is fictional, but those are kind of things that happen. If prisoners sign up to do it, they have to be willing to do it, and not often the victims' families often don't want to do it too.
The other 2
it's
people in the
two-way.
scene real or
they were actors. That was too intensive a scene.
yeah,
to-
that was like
You feel that one. That would have been hard, I think, to get.
because there's just
non-actors
like
in there.
moments in the movie where like you're like in the cell with
Yeah.
him and you're hearing people scream and I'm like, are they screaming? Like, is that real? Like they're just screaming at you, like
Yeah.
because they know you guys are down there doing this, or
There was some of that, but there was also other recorded tracks with the other characters, with the inmates that played characters that would catcall. There was like something. They have these things where they illegally trade stuff between the trades. I forgot the word. They're throwing these long socks along.
Yeah.
I forgot. There's a word for it, and those kind of calls were, we did those lives, and you see that sometimes in the film. But that stuff was recorded, and then some of it was real ambience, and that was all mixed in the sound. I mean, real ambience of what was going on at night in the prison.
I really like how you were using the bars in the foreground. There's a couple like scenes where like you're showing that front door open, and there's just so many layers between him and the front, like freedom, I guess,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and the final shot was open-ended with him getting out. That was something I liked. It was like, basically I wanted to do one long shot of just on Jeffrey's face because he's such an amazing actor, but also the sort of to see sort of all these ambivalent emotions going on in his face as he's finally leaving the prison. And I just wanted to do a very long. It's the only shot in the movie outside of the prison, I think.
Yeah,
that
in
was
the
the
front-
idea.
in the
Yeah,
front of the prison,
and
yeah.
we wanted to do one long shot to go through all the different layers of the gates to get out. It was cut up because he had to change into street clothes and so forth. There's a bit of a thing, but once he's at the final door, it's just this long shot on his face as he's getting away from the prison.
You did that with like a movie, and
Torsten was sitting on the Movio in a Western Dolly on an apple box, and somebody was pulling it, and yeah.
ah, dude, that's lo-fi tech. That's amazing. That's a great shot for being like that,
Yeah, no, it worked out. Torsten was very good, and yeah, it was fun.
Oh yeah.